I printed up a new roster, so it should be up to date as of Tuesday. So if names on here, just sign in. I still have some people who are enrolled in the class, but have never signed the roll ever. So if you are here and have never signed it, should do so I can put you down as attending, if you're here. Okay, so the deadlines remain unchangified. So the quizzes were part 1, deadline on February 1st, end of day. The exam 1, quizzes part 2, March 1st, end of day. And of course, similarly, exam 2, quizzes part 3, April 5th. Exam 3, exam 4, quizzes part 4, April 26th. And then exam 5, end of the normal final time.
The quizzes will be online or in class?
Online. Yep, all the stuff's online.
I was wondering, you had mentioned to wait for a certain, I guess, topic you're going to go over to do the paper. What topic is that?
Oh, wow. Oh, in terms of going over the paper?
Well, no, you had said that don't really start the paper until you've gone over that subject that we're going to be talking about on the paper. So I was wondering, like, what that was.
Oh, and you pick your topic, and so for the paper, if it's like an early topic, then you might want to wait until we cover it. If you pick something later in the course, then
You just write out anything.
well, anything in epistemology. Yep. If you're not sure about the paper, if you go onto Blackboard in the paper folder, there's a PDF guide that goes through the paper step by step and what it's about. Also, if you go to the videos, go to the second course in the spring 2019 videos, and it's records. I spent that class going over how to do the paper. And so if looking at the PDF and the video, if you're still not sure about the paper, just come on my office hours and I'll go through it. And speaking of paper, if you wish to do a draft, deadline April 4th, +5 deadline April 9th, emergency deadline April 16th, desperation deadline April 26th. Also today, nothing to do directly with the class, but there's the CSA, College of Social Sciences, Arts and Humanities, meeting today for majors from 2 to 3:15 over in Lee Hall. So I won't be in the office then because I'll be there. Then I have a committee meeting right afterwards because apparently I'm on all the committees. Except the cool ones, like the donut committee. Well, that one. Okay, so before getting on to our new stuff, or actually really old stuff that's new to us, anything about the stuff that has been or stuff that shall be that needs more stuff? Okay. Okay, so last time we're looking at Plato's arguments about his epistemology. As we saw, his main enemies were the idea of relativism, which he thinks he's dealt with because of his clever or silly argument. Then the second thing is going after the senses, that the senses can't give us knowledge. And he had 3 arguments for that. Basically, the change argument, you can't know stuff because it's constantly changing, it's just appearances anyways. Secondly, you need fixed, unchanging definitions, senses can't give us that. And thirdly, which is, I think, of the 3, the most interesting, the perfect standard argument, that we recognize that the world is imperfect, yet we seem to have these concepts of perfection. In the case of geometry, also like in ethics, perfect justice, etc., and the world falls short. And so his claim is, if we know the perfect and the world is imperfect, we must know something beyond this world. Now his third mission objective or quest goal is to defeat the claim that when you know something, you just believe it and you happen to be right. Basically, right opinion or just true belief. Now he claims that's not enough. What you need, he argues, as an account that provides a rational justification. So he thinks that merely being right is not good enough. Now this does have a certain appeal because, as we know from life, someone could just guess wildly at something, and even if they really believe in it, they could get it right but have no justification for it. I mean, give a couple examples. Like one could be someone like with lottery. You know, they could say, yeah, I feel this is the winning number, and they put it down and they win, forgetting that they felt the same way 1,000 times before. So they could be right, that was the winning number, but we wouldn't say that they knew it. Now, if the person won every time, then we'd probably say, yeah, hey, there's something going on there. Or if someone's just, guessing on a test because they don't know, they just feel, okay, it feels like 42 to this complex problem, and they could still get it right, they wouldn't say that they know. But again, the sort of a counter-intuition is, well, if you believe it and you're right, then I guess you know. And this is one of the core battles in epistemology. Namely, everyone agrees, if you know it, you gotta believe it, it's gotta be true. Then the battle is, does it have to be justified? And then if you say, yeah, it's gotta be justified, the question is, what is that going to be? And as we'll see in the future, with the Gettier problem, there's the argument that you could have it, it could be true, you could believe it, it could be justified, but you still don't know. So Plato at this point, well, long ago, because he's super dead now, he thinks that he has defeated his three main opponents. So what's knowledge going to be? Well, those pixels again, pixelitis. Used to be chalk dust back in the ancient days, and you sneeze and get chalk dust all over everything. I kind of miss chalk, because chalk is super cheap, and you always know how much chalk you got. Expo markers are super expensive, and you never know how much expo you got, because you're writing along and it just goes out and and they're really expensive. Plus they're killing the planet because they're plastic tubes. And that's all I gotta say about expo. So given his arguments, they point to, once you know like what knowledge is not, you kind of get an idea of what it has to be. So he ends up deciding that knowledge is going to have the following characteristics. It's going to be objective rather than subjective to beat the relativist. Because of his argument against the senses, it's something you can't get through your senses. It's going to be universal. Because of his change argument, it's going to be changeless, because if it constantly changed, you couldn't know, or so he claims. And since the senses don't do it, the only alternative is reason. And so in a way, by his arguments, he gets from saying what it can't be, he sees what it has to be, namely the opposite of what it can't be. So this leads him to one of the things Plato is famous for, namely the Platonic forms, sometimes translated as ideas, which is probably a bad translation because idea suggests that it's just in your mind, but for Plato, they're not just in your head, they're not only real, but they're the realest real of all ideas. Now here Plato begins, we're not sure if he originated it because he lost a lot of books and stuff, but he starts off this division, which has infested philosophy ever since. Namely, the distinction between tokens and types. Now in this context, a token is a particular, an individual. You can think of like game tokens. Like Monopoly, you get little pieces, game pieces. And so particulars, sometimes referred to as tokens, are individual things. So each of us would be a particular person. And there are also categories or types. So this would be a particular jacket of the type jacket. And this would be like a table of the type table. Which is something that humans have long done, individuals and groups. Now, Plato's deal here is the knowledge thing. So what is it that we know? Well, what we know according to him are what are called forms, which again is in a way is sort of like not a great term. So the more contemporary term is universal. In this context, universal is, a Platonic universal is something with the following qualities. And again, given his view, it's what we know, and it's got to have these qualities. So what are these forms, what do they got? What's on their description? Well, first, they are eternal. They have always been, and they always shall be. Secondly, they can never ever change. Because if they changed, you couldn't know them. So they've always been, they always shall be, and they've always been as they are, and they shall never change. And of course, this is okay because they are utterly perfect. Now for him, each form or universal is one distinct thing. So it would be like justice, the form of justice, beauty, triangle, possibly. And so each one is a single thing that is utterly eternal, utterly changeless, and utterly perfect. Now one way to understand this, because it's kind of weird, is it's kind of similar to like God. How so? Well, how perfect is God supposed to be? Yes, super perfect, all the perfections. And what Plato did in a way, it's kind of like, imagine if God, this is going to be horrifying, was like split up into pieces. Kind of like the Infinity Stones, you know? So instead of just like one being with all the power, you have like, you know, them all separated out. Or another way to look at it is, the God of Christianity, Islam, etc., is basically all of Plato's forms put together into one entity, because it's all perfections in one. Whereas Plato has it all split up. So instead of just one perfect being with all these great qualities, there's one perfect thing of each thing. Perfect justice, perfect beauty, perfect knowledge, etc. Now, you might say, hey, I've never seen perfect justice. And when I've been at Starbucks or Target or Starjay, combining Starbucks and Target into one, copyright, that I've never seen like perfect beauty or any of this stuff or the perfect coffee. Well, here's why. For Plato, these forms are not here. Where are they? Well, in a way, they're not anywhere because they're outside of time and they're outside of space. Again, probably the way to make some sense of this is, again, think of it in terms of like religion. Heaven is not, as the song says, it's not a place on earth, it's not here. You can't like build a ladder to, or even a stairway, even if you're Led Zeppelin, to heaven. It's not a place you can take a ship to. You get there by dying. And Plato's idea is the same. The forms are not here, they're real, but they're not here. And again, and people refer to it as the Platonic heaven. How does that work? Nobody knows. Just like, you know, when it comes to heaven, you can have the metaphysics of it, but it's not like a place. One way to think of it is like another dimension. If you like sci-fi, you know, if you've seen like Stranger Things, they're in that idea there's other realities or dimensions. That's where Plato's forms would be. Not on the upside down, but in a much nicer place. So how do these formy things, how do they do their thing here? Well, Plato claims that all the stuff here participates in or imitates the forms. What does that mean? Well, it's a metaphor, and critics have always said this is not the most crazy thing Plato has said, but pretty crazy. So, how does that work? Well, kind of the idea is this. I'll use a metaphor to illustrate it. Now, everyone's familiar with like videos. I used to use tapes, then I switched to CDs. Who uses CDs anymore? Are they still even an option? Can you even acquire them? I know records are coming back because some people say that the record has like a special, authentic feel to it, and people spend a lot of money getting like turntables and vacuum tubes, etc. And I can't tell the difference. I should not be. I have no taste. So I should really not be used for that. So here's the idea. I'll use a metaphor. Think of like when they film like a film in super high def 3D with those really expensive cameras, and that would be the think of that as like the original, the master copy, and then of course that gets copied. So if you go to a theater which has the IMAX, HD, 3D, etc., you get a really good version of that. If you go to like a IMAX, non 3D, you get a lesser version. And of course, when it later shows up, pirated on like YouTube, say someone filming it in the theater, then it's an even worse quality. Or another way to use the metaphor is if you use Amazon, their video thing. If you go onto, like if you have a Kindle Fire thing, you can download them in different degrees of quality to say the space. You have like, fast, etc. And each one is the original, which would be as good as it gets, and then you can have lesser quality to save space. So Plato's form would be like the original. It would be, in his case, the form's perfect. And then stuff down here would be like the lesser copies. They are copies of the original, but they have less and less quality. Now, of course, the big difference is that the form, unlike the original film, is not here. It's off in Platonic heaven, but somehow stuff here imitates that somehow. And that's a big mystery because there's this space-time gap that somehow gets crossed. And people have said, how does that work? And people who follow Plato says, well, they do have a solution. In terms of how you know it, but in terms of how it works, big mystery. So for Plato, what you know are these forms, but they're not here. You'll never see them here. Now, one approach Plato could have taken is, and this is something taken by our good dead friend Aristotle and Tommy Aquinas, is you know about the forms because you see the lesser stuff here. So it'd be kind of like if you look at low quality BitTorrent copy of a film, you can imagine like the perfect version. You think of it being like clearer. Now Plato rejects that. He says you can't know this stuff. It's all imperfect and changing. You have to know the realest of the real. But it's not here. So how do you do it? Here's his answer. You learn when you're dead. Which is why learning hurts. Because it reminds you of death. That's why being in classes is tough, because you're like, this reminds me of learning is death, this is death. That's logic. Now in Plato's dialogue, the Meno, he runs into this character, Meno, who says to Socrates, well, you can't know stuff or learn stuff for the following reason. If you already know it, you don't need to learn it because you know it. If you don't know it, you won't know when you learn it because you don't know what you don't know. So you can never learn. It's kind of like, to use a rough metaphor, if someone says, I'm searching for glove. Well, if you don't know what it is, you're never going to know if you found it. It could be like in your pocket and you wouldn't know. So what Plato has to do, / Socrates, is show how do we know stuff? How do we get this knowledge? Now kind of the main problem he faces is, from a practical standpoint, how do we bridge the space-time gap and know perfect beauty, perfect justice, etc. Well again, the solution is, spoiler alert, death. Now, why does he think this occurs? Well, in the Meno, what Socrates does is he walks Meno's servant through a geometric proof. I won't grind through the steps because it's like geometry. That gives me flashbacks to junior high. I can't go back there. So he goes through the steps of this proof. And what Socrates claims is he's not feeding the servant information. What he's claiming he's doing is sort of like extracting it, or making the person recall it. So he would ask the person the question, and the claim Socrates makes is the person already knows the answer, they just have to be reminded of the answer. Now critics say that Socrates is leading the person, like use an analogy to law, leading the witness. That he is asking questions in a way that the person is already guided to the answer. But his claim is that he simply asks all these questions and he's causing the servant to remember things, geometry, and get all the right answers. Now, he says Socrates says there's two possibilities. One, he learned it in this life, in which case he's just recollecting what he learned. And he asked Meno, does your servant know geometry as he learned it? And Meno says, no, he doesn't. And so the other option, which is quite a leap, is that Socrates says, well, if he didn't learn it when he was alive, he must have learned it when he was dead. Now this is not like a, Walking Dead scenario where we're learning as zombies, zombieing our way through school. Our soul goes off, according to Socrates, and communes with the forms. Again, one way to think of this that may make more sense, it's like in Christianity and Islam, etc., certain views, you die, your soul goes to heaven, you're hanging out with the angels and God. And for Plato, that's what happens. You die, your soul goes to the forms, you're hanging out with them, communing with them. So you're hanging out with perfect justice, and perfect beauty and perfect truth. And then, critical to this, eventually you're reborn. And the shock, then you'd say, well, I don't remember, I remember doing that, I think I would remember that. And according to Plato, the shock of rebirth basically doesn't erase your memory, but kind of jostles it. To use an analogy, if you take your hard drive on your computer, memory on your phone, one thing of course you can do is you can just like drag files in the trash and delete them. And you can reformat like the whole hard drive. But when you're trashing stuff, or even when you reformat your hard drive, you're not really deleting anything. What you're doing is, to use an analogy, another analogy for analogy, it's like you're in an office and you have like a big filing cabinet full of like old paper, and instead of just like dumping it on the trash, you just put a sticky note on it saying, this is all trash, throw away as you need. And so when you're deleting stuff, you're basically putting a sticky note on it from your computer saying, this is all trash, if you need your space, just write over it. But until something's written over it, it's still there, like that filing cabinet. So until someone comes along and dumps out all that paper, it's still there. So what happens is, it's like when you're reborn, it's like all that stuff gets thrown into like the mental trash, so to speak. But it's still there. And what Plato says, what philosophy does is, it's like doing a recovery. You can take stuff out of the trash. Or to use another similar metaphor, back in the early days of hard drives, they would fail occasionally. Like you'd go and boot your computer up and be like hard drive failure, and like the boot sector would be corrupted or something. And there are utilities which could repair it. So your disk could be wiped out, and then if you know what you're doing, you could recover it. And so in a way, Socrates is like the disk recovery person for the soul. And so the idea is all that stuff's still in there, he just has to go in and sort of, repair it. And then through this philosophy, you recall. You recall the forms. Now, in terms of what's in there, it's not stuff like who's going to win the next Super Bowl, or who's going to win the election, or winning lottery numbers. It's the forms, like perfect justice, perfect beauty, etc. And Plato also thinks things like mathematics and morality and so on. So it's not like particular things here in the world of the senses, it's all this form stuff, according to him. And then philosophy is the art of remembering. And the idea through the dialectic is, as questions are asked, it's like repairing those damaged bits. And you're like, oh yeah, I remember perfect beauty, I remember perfect justice. Now, in a way, this is analogous to, have you ever heard of repressed memories in psychology? A similar sort of deal. Except in this case, they're not like bad memories, but the idea is that just like a psychologist supposedly recovers repressed memories, Socrates would recover, hidden memories. And so he thinks this solves it, because you already know all this stuff, it's just in your hard drive, and you've got to find the folder. You've got to get the directory restored. And philosophy does that. And then you die again, and then it starts over. Now, Plato also argues in the Republic that the whole point of this, you might say, like, why do we keep doing this, is each life, he claims, you get to pick your life. And the whole point of it is to become wiser and wiser and pick better and better lives. Like he gives the example of how someone in a way, it's kind of like, it's like picking a vacation or something. He gives an example of how someone goes over and looks at like a life, and they get to be like this ruler, but they just immediately grab that option without reading further, where they're tyrants and they end up being killed by their children or something. So they make a bad choice. So I guess always read the fine print. But according to Plato, at least, you learn when you're dead. Now, the obvious problem, of course, is, as I noted in Plato's Meno, critics have said he's just asking leading questions. So this requires a lot of stuff. You got to have the forms, you got to have a soul, you got to be reborn, and so there's a lot of moving parts. So not surprisingly, critics have said, yeah, this is a bit much. Before moving on to more form, anything about death? It needs more stuff. So the forms, again, are real, they're objective, independent, unchanging, they don't exist in space or time. And one of the big problems, again, for them is that participation imitation problem. I mean, we know what it is for, like, to copy a video or a sound file, but how stuff here somehow, copies that is a mystery. Again, because of that space, time gap. So why does Plato have this, kind of problematic distinction? Well, I alluded to it earlier, mentioning some other even more dead philosophers. Now, one thing in Greek philosophy and other philosophy is the paradox of change. The paradox of change is this. In order for change to occur, something has to stay the same. Because if nothing stays the same, you don't have change, you have destruction. So there's got to be something that remains constant. Now, Greek philosophers were concerned about, change and the appearance of change. Our good dead friend Heraclitus, he's the guy that said the world, his metaphysics was the world is fire, and metaphorically, and that everything changes, but also literally, in that on his view, the fundamental substance is fire. And he, of course, had that famous quote, "You never step in the same river twice." So Heraclitus said, nothing is permanent, all is change. And as we talked about with the senses, for Plato, that is the world of the senses. So part of his compromise is the world of the senses is like the world of Heraclitus. What about the unchanging world? Well, the unchanging world comes from our good dead friend Parmenides, which sounds like a cheese. But if you're at a restaurant and someone says, "Would you like some Parmenides on your salad?" do not accept. Otherwise, they'd be sprinkling dead philosopher on your spaghetti. You don't want that. Now, Parmenides' belief was that nothing changes. Now, there would seem to be an obvious refutation. Namely, you look around and stuff does seem to change. Things move, etc. But Parmenides argued that this was an illusion. Now, how could that be? Well, there was another famous philosopher called Zeno. He was kind of a cool name. Zeno created the famous Zeno's paradoxes, lots of them, which were he would take arguments that were perfectly reasonable and lead to seemingly insane conclusions, which either he was like serious about it, or he was like, look where logic can take you. One of the most famous ones is the argument about why there can be no motion. And here's the argument. And every step of it makes perfect sense. Now, for me to get to the table, I've got to cover half the distance. Totally true. Because to get the full distance, you've got to go half. But of course, to get to the halfway point, I've got to get to half of that, the quarter point. And of course, to get to the quarter point, I've got to get to half of that, and half of that, and half of that. And since, it's infinitely divisible, the reasoning is I would have to cover an infinite distance, an infinite number of steps to get to the table by that method. Therefore, I can't cover an infinite distance, therefore I can never reach the table. Motion is impossible. Now the obvious refutation is, there I am, doing the impossible. But it is a seemingly logically flawless argument. So the conclusion is that there is no motion, there just seems to be motion. Therefore, nothing ever changed. Now Plato kind of like that. And so, but he kind of thought, well, the world seems to change, so the forms become the changeless. So for Plato, this world, physical world, changes constantly, the world of fire. And the world of the forms is Parmenides' world, where nothing ever, well, we change, because we souls come in, but the forms never change. Or so he claims. So you end up with an imperfect physical world and a perfect Platonic heaven. Before pressing on, anything about that? Or Parmenides? Or Parmesan? He needs more stuff. Parmesan is achieved, that's okay. Parmenides, no. So what's the world that we live in like according to Plato? Well, a critical part of it is that reality comes in degrees. And this infects philosophy forever. Well, I can't really say forever, because forever is a long time. But it's infected philosophy since then. Now, normally, like kind of today, we think of things as being real or not real, as opposed to being like degrees of reality. But for Plato, the ancients, the medievals, the idea was that the world does have degrees of reality. Now, for Plato, the most real are the forms. People like Thomas Aquinas, they don't believe in the forms, but they do have still the degrees of reality. So how to think of degrees of reality? Again, because normally think of it's real or it's not. It's like, binary. One way to look at it is in terms of like quality. So again, going back to the example of the video, you could say in a way the highest quality one is more real. Although again, our intuition is typically it's real or it's not, is not more real. Another way to look at it is in terms of like power. So things that are more real are more powerful, more, have more like levels in game of speed. So a critical part of this view is that there are degrees of reality. Now this has later on vast implications. Interestingly, to just give one illustration, when it comes to eating meat, because this will sound kind of odd because we think of like vegetarianism as something recent, but thinkers like Augustine and Aquinas consider the question of whether killing and eating animals would be morally okay. Because the Bible says thou shalt not kill, and animals are alive, and you don't want to go to hell for a hamburger, or burger, or burger, who knows. So the argument that Augustine and Aquinas gave was, well, there's a hierarchy in the world, and if you're better than something, it's okay for you to eat it. Now, this also has horrifying implications in ethics, because when people want to do bad stuff, like commit genocide, they always say, we're better than them, so we can genocide them. And or we're better than them, so we can harass them or oppress them. And so one sort of nightmare implication of this view is, people always say, we're better than them, we can do terrible stuff. I'm not saying people wouldn't have done it in any ways without a philosophical justification, but it does provide a metaphysical justification for being terrible, because you can always say, we're better than them. Now, Plato contends, again, the forms cause the particulars. So the qualities we have, like beauty, justice, intelligence, they're all from the forms. So why is something beautiful? A form. Why is something just? The form. And it uses a variety of metaphors. The particulars resemble the forms, they participate in the forms in varying degrees, and again, critics say, what? What does that mean? So what do these forms do? Well, again, function one. This is what we know, because they don't change, so you know, like, You can know something like, weirdly, you wouldn't know if someone was beautiful, you would know beauty. You'd have an opinion that someone was beautiful. Also, the beauty the person has would be caused by the form. So to the degree that someone's beautiful, they're participating in the form. So I guess if you wanted to compliment someone philosophically, you would say they participated a great deal in beauty. Or if you want to insult them, you would say they barely participate in beauty at all. And there's also a question of, are there negative bad forms? Like, is there actually like a form of ugly? And in Plato's own dialogues, he raises that question, are there yucky forms, like the form of like, shower mold or something? Function 2, they make everything what it is. So again, somebody's beautiful because of the form beauty. Thirdly, the grouping function. So we categorize things correctly or incorrectly based on the forms. So all beautiful things are beautiful because of the forms, and they're grouped together into the group of beautiful things by the form. So they have at least 3 functions. They're what we know, they make stuff what they are, and they group things into groups. So they do a lot of stuff.
I'm sorry, could you repeat what you said? They are what we know.
Oh, sorry, yeah. First thing is they're what we know, so they're objects of knowledge. So what we can know would be the forms. Secondly, everything that is, according to Plato, is what it is because of the form. So think of any quality that you or anything has, like the table being a table. It is a table because it imitates the form table, however that works. Thirdly, it groups things into categories. So all the desks are desks, according to Plato. They're grouped because they are desks because of the form, and they're all grouped into the category of desks by that form. To use an analogy, it's like their club. Or, to use an analogy like a family. What makes people part of a family, like a biological family, it's because they're from, saying they're related. So they do a lot of stuff, which is one reason why they've stuck around for so long, because they do so much stuff. And there are still people today who believe in the Platonic forms. You could go to, not here, I don't believe in those things, that's crazy. I believe in crazier stuff. But you could go to like Ohio State or something and find a Platonist. Continuing, we go, of course, to Plato's famous line, an allegory of the cave. And of course, no philosophy would be complete without talking about the cave. This excerpt is from Plato's Republic. And what he's doing is going through opinion versus knowledge. And what Plato does is he divides people into 2 groups, namely those who love opinion and those who love wisdom, specifically philosophers and everyone else. And obviously the side to be on for Plato's philosophers is going to be the philosophers. So he begins here talking about the one and the many. And this is what he does. He notes that beauty and ugliness are 2 because each one is one and they're not the same thing, which is true. Because beauty is not ugliness and each one is one, they're 2. It's like, it'd be like saying Sam is not Sally, they're each one person, so there's 2. So, okay, yeah, seems true. Now, then he says, he's talking about the many. And what he means is this. The many would be all the things that blend beauty and ugliness. Now here he seems to be sort of, stating that there is a form of ugly. Because beauty is one thing, ugly another, and then all the particular things are a mix of beauty and ugliness. Or so he claims. Now, because of this, he's going to make the division we've seen. Namely, here would be the realm of the forms, and I guess this implies there is a perfect ugliness, perfectly ugly. So I guess if you want to insult somebody, I guess you could use perfect ugliness. I guess it's candy. And then there are all the individual things here. So, to illustrate, these would be the forms. You know, the form of perfect beauty, the form of perfect ugly, and then all the beautiful ugly things in the world are, good book title, all the beautiful ugly things. Probably already a book title or a song.
I have a question. Can you go back and explain the two, where it says the one and the many, and then it says two?
Oh, sure. Plato says that, talking about beauty, he says there's beauty and there's ugliness. These have to be two things because each one is one thing, beauty is one thing, ugliness is another, and they're not the same. So if you have, if you have two ones, you get two. In a way, he's presenting in a way that's probably needlessly confusing. Essentially what he's saying is beauty and ugliness are different things. Since they're not the same thing, each one is one, then you've got two things. So it's probably making it needlessly complicated. Now, the many part is that his view is, again, that all the things here on Earth, all the particular things, they're like a blend of these two. I mean, to use like a metaphor, you could say, there are two parents who have many kids. So each parent is a parent, they're not the same, so there's two of them, but they can have many children. Might be one way of looking at it. Is that all?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Now, so there are two realms. This would be the world we live in. And Plato says there are those who he calls them lovers of sounds and sights. And they would be the people who look at all the stuff here in the world. So, for example, I guess they'd be going with beauty, they'd be on Instagram looking at all the Instagram models and so on. And then there are those who are concerned with the true forms. Now he says, being critical, that life is like a dream if all a person does is focus on this. Which in a way is kind of odd because normally think of like this as being real and this being just like, made up stuff. But Plato thinks that this is like a dream because it's not really, it's not a dream, but it's not the realist. So the real world, like being fully awake, would be being aware of the forms, absolute beauty and the forms. So in a way, the analogy would be, his implicit analogy is, if a person just focuses on this, that's like living in the dream world, where it's just things that are not, you experience them, but they're not truly real. And the real world is, the realist world is this. Now he's not saying that the world is a dream, that is, just in your head, but in terms of levels of reality, we think of dreams as being experienced, but not like real. Like if you dream you are eating like a giant pizza as big as the state of Florida, you don't wake up being like, oh God, I'm gonna die, unless you eat your pillow during the dream. So dream, metaphorically, reality. Now, this is for him the realm of knowledge, this is the realm of opinion. So in a way he's being critical of people who just focus here. Now interestingly, as you might imagine, usually the criticism of people who are like looking beyond the stuff here and thinking about the stuff beyond. The people who are like philosophers are characterized as the dreamers, and the people who focus on like the stuff here, like Instagram models, etc., they're focused on what's real. But Plato flips that on its head. Being concerned about the stuff here is thinking about what's not very real, and thinking about the forms is the real stuff. So why think this? Well, Plato, of course, being Plato, he's got a lot of arguments. So he wants to distinguish between knowing stuff, opinion, and ignorance. So he thinks those are three separate things. And again, it kind of ties back to his view that true opinion is not knowledge. So kind of his main deal is saying knowledge is not just opinion, that's true. So here's his first argument, the being and non-being argument. Now if you know, do you know something or do you know nothing? Yeah, you know something. Now he claims that if something is absolute, you can absolutely know, or so he claims. And something that is utterly non-existent is something you can't know because there's nothing to know. And once he has this, extreme, absolute being nothingness, zeroness, then he says there's a middle in there. And his claim is that in the middle would be the particulars, and these would be things that are matters of opinion. So his claim is that knowledge corresponds to absolute being, ignorance corresponds to nothing, because if you know nothing, you have ignorance. And then in between absolute and nothing, there's the realm of opinion, or so he claims. So argument one, such as it is basically, if you know something, and if the absolute is something you can know absolutely, then nothing is something you can't know at all because there's nothing, and then there's going to be something he claims in between, or so he claims. Second argument, the spheres and faculties argument. Now, faculties for him are powers in us. The senses, for example, can be seen as, a faculty, sight, hearing, touch, etc. And I'll use that as kind of a metaphor to illustrate this. Now he claims, if you have two things that actually have the same sphere, they're the same thing. So if you have, a sense that detects the visual, then they'd be the same. If you imagine like actually there are some creatures that have like multiple different types of eyes. We got two, but there are some creatures that have, like jellyfish. There's a box jellyfish. They have some eyes that are image forming, and there are others that just are basically light sensors. And so you'd say, well, they got image forming and light sensors, but they're still the same sphere. Namely, they deal with, visible light. So even though they're different, they're really the same faculty, namely sight. Just one is better at it than another. I guess it'd be kind of weird to have like 16 eyes process all that data. Now, things that have different spheres, he claims, are different. To use the analogy of the senses, do we hear colors? Typically no. Although there is a condition, I think it's called synesthesia, where the senses get kind of blended together. And people can they hear sounds, they look at colors and such. It seems like it'd be super confusing, or maybe super useful. So yeah, there's the sounds, sights, etc., and we separate our senses by what they detect. So hearing is not sight, because we hear different things than the visual data we get. So far, so good.
Can you stay on this for just a couple?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so his claim is that so far we've gotten to each faculty's got its own sphere, and you can divide spheres up by faculties, just like with the senses. If you're characterizing the senses of, suppose you're a xenobiologist, you find some weird alien creature and it's not trying to kill you, you try to figure out what its senses can detect and group them accordingly.
What is a sphere and faculty?
Oh, the sphere would be what sort of, to use the metaphor of sight and hearing, would be what it encompasses. So, for example, the sphere of sight would be visible light. The sphere of sound would be what is audible, the hearing. The sphere of touch would be visibly touchable. And the result would be, well, literally the result, like what you get. So, in the case of sight, you have the sphere of visible light, and the result is a visual image. So something, like if you were, again, imagine like you're a xenobiologist or, or just neurobiology, you find some weird creature like, what's this thing do? And it has like all these different like senses on it, but you're able to figure out, oh, these things detect light. Okay, that's all vision. These things detect sound, even though it's got like 12 of them. They're all, sound sensors, so they're basically ear-like things. And that's how we categorize animals' senses. Even if it's even if they got like 16 eyes and some detect ultraviolet, some are just light patch sensors, you'd say, okay, those are all just eyes of different types. Anything else? Now then, of course, he turns to knowledge and opinion. He claims, and this could be, of course, contested, that knowledge has its own sphere, namely absolute being, because his claim is you have forms, so they're their own thing, so there's got to be a faculty corresponding to them. Just like, you get visible light, and so whatever detects visible light is going to be sight. Then, of course, there's like the nothingness, which, of course, that's the exact opposite of perfect being, and that corresponds to ignorance. Then he claims there's like a third area between perfection and nothing, and he claims, well, that's its own thing. I mean, to use the metaphor, this would be like visible light, so you got sight. This would be like tactile, so touch, and this would be like audio, or vibrations. So this would be like hearing, and so we'd say, well, you get different spheres, so different faculties. And this would be the faculty of opinion, or so he claims. Essentially, what he's saying is we got 3 different categories of things, and since they're not the same thing, and if we're aware of them, we would have to have different faculties. Again, going back to the senses analogy, we don't hear a color or taste sound or touch. We don't touch colors. We don't tell them to touch. We have different faculties corresponding to those. So if there are forms, nothing in between, each one gets its own faculty, or so he claims. So knowledge to the forms, opinion to the stuff here, between forms and nothing, and then ignorance corresponds to nothing. Why? Well, going to his next argument, if you get an opinion, do you have an opinion about something or nothing?
Something.
Yeah, something. I mean, there could be a show about nothing. Apparently that's what Seinfeld is supposed to be. Never actually saw an episode of that. I know, weird, pretty weird. Never saw the movie E.T. either. Never got it.
Oh, you're wrong for that.
I know. I've been told I'm a terrible person because of that. But I will resist Steven Spielberg and his marketing of Reese's Pieces. Forever. I mean, I know who E.T. is. Now, so if you get an opinion about something, and you can't have an opinion about nothing, then you get an opinion about something. Now, not being, of course, is nothing. So you don't have opinions about nothing, or so he argues. So not being is not going to be the subject of opinion, or so he claims. Now again, this can be seen as like a good argument, or it can just mean as being kind of clever wordplay. Like you got to have an opinion about something, nothing is not something, so you can't have opinions about nothing. Although weirdly you kind of can, because you could have opinions about nothing. If you ever read Alice in Wonderland, there's a lot of weird wordplay like that. Like when they say like nobody is faster than this messenger, and the messenger thinks that that there's a person, nobody, who's faster than them, because negations in English are kind of weird. Because if you say nobody is faster than this messenger, wow, who is this nobody, and why are they so fast? So opinion then is going to be that middle ground. So ignorance, is, it kind of recaps, matches non-being, to nothing. Knowledge matches being, and opinion is the middle, which Since knowledge owns forms, and ignorance owns nothing, opinion owns that middle ground between absolute and nothing. All the stuff here, or so he claims. So, what then is bad about opinion, according to Plato? Well, in the realm of opinion, which is between the forms and nothing, using a particular example of beauty, those who love sights and sounds, the beautiful will also be the ugly. It's a blend. And the ideas are basically halfway, half-baked, so to speak. They're a blend. So they just have opinion, but not knowledge. Now, Plato, of course, is right about this. One clear illustration is people look at, if you take like, models or art or something, some people see a particular model or painting is beautiful, other people say, it's ugly. Not just they don't like it, but it's hideous. And so you really can't say, in that regard, like what is correct. Also, even if you lay aside like the battle of opinions, even if you take the most beautiful person or beautiful thing, you can always find flaws. Which is why when they do magazine covers, they always Photoshop the hell out of models now. Because even if they're a supermodel, they're still human beings, so you still gotta Photoshop them. And some images we get are actually composites. They're like Frankenstein's beauty models. They take like pieces of, I don't mean they chop people up because that'd be a good horror movie, but they take like, one set of legs and torso and then put them together and then Photoshop them all together to create this ideal model. Which of course creates impossible images, because not only are they like the best parts for people, they're also totally faked. So he divides people into those two categories again. Those who have opinion but lack knowledge, they see the many things, but they don't see the absolute. And Plato's being fairly critical of them. And again, sort of ironically, the sort of usual view is that people who are thinking about all this abstract stuff like beauty and justice, they have their heads in the clouds and they're dreamers, and people should focus on the concrete. Plato, again, is kind of flipping that over, saying, well, no, this is the really real, this is the dream kind of fake stuff. And so he thinks that those who see the many, who don't see beyond the world of appearance to understand true justice and true beauty, who are beguiled by the beautiful things and the just things, they're limited, they're mistaken, they're not seeing reality, or so he claims. Now again, critics, of course, would reverse that. They would say the people who are talking about perfect justice and perfect beauty, they're the ones making stuff up, and they should just focus on, the concrete stuff here. So for him, the many things, the beautiful things here, are seen but not known. Now again, his standard of knowledge is very high, because in normal conversation, it'd be odd to say to someone like, oh, you're looking at Instagram, you see the many beautifuls, but you do not know beauty. Which would be an odd thing to say. But in a way, Plato's right, because if all they do is look at pretty pictures, and they don't have any comprehension of beauty itself, they really don't know beauty. They say like, they're just giving examples. Here's pretty stuff. Now the absolute for Plato, again, would be those forms. They are known, but you don't see them because they're not here. So it would be understanding true beauty, and not just being able to, like, going back to these criticisms of just using examples rather than definition. A person who just understands the many would, if you ask them what is beauty, they would take you to their Instagram stalking account and show all the people they're stalking. Whereas someone who understands absolute beauty would say, here is what beauty is, and give you an account of beauty. Or so he claims. Now again, critics have argued with Plato since then, so just because he's super dead and super famous, doesn't mean he's right. Plato, like all philosophers, of course, loves analogies. And he draws an analogy to both the eye and the sun. And he says the soul is like the eye, such that under moonlight or bad lighting, of course, we can't see things clearly. Things are kind of fuzzy and obscure. And that would be, metaphorically speaking, like the world of the many. You're not seeing things clearly. But in the bright sunshine, you are seeing, metaphorically speaking, your eyes seeing things as they are, undistorted. And so that would be like the realm of the forms. Yeah, Plato really likes this analogy, so he continues it with the sun. And here's how he does the analogy. Now again, Plato's got two realms. The realms of forms, and here, the realm of particulars. And so he's drawing an analogy between the two realms. Now, in this realm, we have the sun, and Plato was well aware that, the sun casts light, and of course it gives us warmth, so we don't freeze to death. And also, he was aware that it provided, all the nourishment and energy, because, they didn't have theories of photosynthesis, etc. But the Greeks got, plants needed sun. They didn't know about, solar energy, etc. exactly, but they were well aware that plants needed sunlight. And so in the physical world, the sun is, provides the energy, provides the warmth, and going to the realm of forms by analogy, what corresponds to the sun for Plato in the realm of the forms is the good, which is sort of for Plato the supreme form. It is the ultimate form. Now, as you might gather, in many ways this is similar to religion, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, etc., because you have a supreme entity, in this case the good, and if you change one letter, God. And on Plato's view, the good, in a way, is the author of all knowledge and being and essence, kind of the cause of all of this. And of course, in religions, monotheistic religions like Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, God is the cause of everything. So one way to kind of grasp the good, Plato's good, is you can think of like God, if God wasn't like a person. So for Plato, good is not like a person. It's not like a personality, etc. Probably like another metaphor would be kind of like in the Star Wars movies, like the Force in a way, kind of. And this would be like the Force, the cause of everything. So Plato ends up with this, this metaphor. In the physical world, you get the sun shining down and providing light to everything. And in the ultimate reality, you have the good shining, so to speak, on all and illuminating all the forms and providing all this existence, etc. So Plato's universe is fundamentally moral. There is an ultimate moral, objective moral force, the good, that illuminates everything. Now again, this has a huge influence, because later you get, of course, the idea of God, and we'll see the way we kind of know the forms is by the illumination of the good. And we get this notion of, as we'll see in the future, illumination and enlightenment, which goes back to Plato. Now, in the Republic, one of the many famous things in it is, of course, Plato's line. And the character of Socrates says, okay, let's draw a line. And he draws it like this. And the disparity in size is actually correct. You may look and say, hey, why is D and C smaller? Oh, he actually draws it that way. So Socrates draws this line. And what it's supposed to do is illustrate, graphically, his division of metaphysics and epistemology, how things divide up. Now it goes from A to D, where unlike the grading scale, A is worse, D is best. So I guess if you ever get a D, you can say, hey, on the Platonic scale, I'm doing great. Now the lowest level, and each level has its own, like, what it is, and as you'd expect from Plato, as we've just seen, each one has like a faculty that corresponds to like how we are aware of it. The worst level, level A, is the realm of images. And the faculty we have that corresponds to this is imagination. So what lives there? Well, what lives there would be literally images. Plato thinks that all of art, plays, paintings, today would be movies, etc., they're all in level A. Also things like shadows and hallucinations would be there as well. But most importantly, all of art. Because if you take a class of aesthetics, which may be taught again, and you look at Plato's book 10 of the Republic, he's very critical of art for two reasons. One is that he believes that, as this states, all of art lives in the realm of the least. Shadows, hallucinations, and images. So things like poetry, painting, and sculpture are all just images. They're not real. So one thing he thinks is they're sort of misleading, they're untrue. His most sort of compelling and damning argument is a moral one, in which he argues that if you observe art that involves, well, he focuses on like tragedy, which makes people cry, violent art, art that includes sexuality and comedy. His claim is that if you're exposed to it, you'll let your guard down because you think it's just art, it's not real, and you'll become corrupted. So by watching violent films or playing, today playing violent video games, you'll become violent. Now that argument, of course, pretty much almost all arguments of censorship today use Plato's argument. Like back when Hillary Clinton was slamming on Grand Theft Auto, I'll never forgive you for that, Hillary. Not that I'm a Grand Theft Auto fan, but she was attacking video games. And that just doesn't sit right in my book of video games. And her argument was essentially Plato's. Playing video games corrupts people, gets them corrupted with violence and sex, and therefore they should be censored or banned. And people still like the same argument today, that art has this corrupting influence. And it's just Plato's argument. Hillary's probably, I'm sure Hillary's read Plato, she knows Plato. Other people just use the argument. They're not sure where it comes from, but they still use it. It's especially funny when they use Plato's argument to try to ban Plato, which I guess is okay. So this level is the least, the weakest, the worst. Next step up, level B, is the physical world, like this stuff. Now you might say, but wait, wouldn't like a painting be physical, or a statue be physical? The answer is yeah, but you're looking at it, when you're looking at a statue as art, you're not considering it as a physical object, you're considering it as an object of art. Like with a painting, you're thinking of it as an image of, say, if you have like a painting of a pizza, you're thinking of it not as a pizza, but as a painting of a pizza. Yeah, the actual physical object is an object, but the image itself is a imitation of a real thing. Or like a statue is the physical object, but it's supposed to imitate a person. So a statue is not a real person. And the painting of a pizza is not an actual pizza. I mean, it's an actual picture, but not an actual pizza. So these would be the actual things, people, pizzas, etc. Now again, technically like a statue would be a physical object, but it would be looked at as an object, not as an imitation of something. Now for Plato, this would be the realm still of belief and opinion, because given his view, you can't know any of this stuff, because it's constantly changing, you only get it through your senses. Now one implication here is all the physical sciences would still just be opinion. Now Plato wouldn't say that, it's all relative. So if someone said, hey, according to Plato, climate change is just opinion, so it's not real, Plato would say you're doing it wrong. Because he thinks there would be better or worse, scientific claims. But true, all stuff about this world on his epistemology, you couldn't know. It would all be opinion. But he didn't think that some opinions, all opinions were equally good. There'd be better or worse opinions. So if Plato's around today, he'd probably say, yeah, climate change is, well, he wouldn't say it's real because only the forms are real, but he'd say, yes, it is probably occurring. Maybe, who knows? You know, maybe he'd be a Trump supporter wearing a Trump hat. No, probably not. Now, the next level up, where you can actually start knowing stuff, is the realm of the mathematics and what are sometimes called the lower forms. Now, this level has two main qualities. First, the way three in a way. We can know this stuff, but first, we use symbols on this level. So mathematics, logic, etc., chemistry, no, not chemistry, mathematics and logic, we use symbols. So if you have like a formula, or a argument, or we have symbols, etc. Plato says, at this level, we work with symbols to represent the real things. So the geometric things we draw are visual representations of the real circles and planes, etc. The mathematics we write out with symbols, the logic we write out, correspond to the forms, the real stuff, often that Platonic heaven. So first, we can know this stuff. Secondly, we do it with symbols. Third, the way we understand it, or kind of way kind of know it, is by doing steps of proofs. So if you took like geometry, and you've done like the proofs, like where you're proving various things, or if you had logic and you're doing proofs of truth tables, Plato believes that you use symbols, you go through steps, you prove it, and that's how you know. So it's done through symbols and steps. Now the highest level, and we'll close with this, at this level, this is the realm of the forms. And I mentioned like the good shining down on all things, like light. His view is at this level, you don't use symbols, you don't use proofs, but you do know. And the way you know is by the light of reason, the illumination of the good. And this creates all kinds of problems forever, because on one hand it's kind of like, okay, yeah, you see the truth, self-evident truths. But on the other hand there's the problem of how do you know when this is actually working? How do you know when you're illuminated by the light of truth and goodness and natural light, and when you just like really, really think it's true? And Plato didn't really lay out any clear signs. And then after Plato, thinkers like Descartes just started throwing around like the natural light, and Aquinas talking about you just see it by the natural light. And then later on, as we'll see, John Locke said, well, how do you tell? And no one really has a satisfactory answer, because it's easy to say, yes, I see it illuminated by the light of reason, but how do you tell when you're seeing it by the light of reasoning, or just having like a stroke or something? And that's kind of a big problem. I mean, this part, pretty well established, proofs, etc. This is like still mystery. So next time, more mystery. So have a good rest of the day, and I'll see you on a Tuesday, if I survive the weekend. No expectation to die on the weekend, but you never know.